Hello, I'm Brian Crane, joining you from the NASDAQ market site. Our guest today is Daniel Teper, CEO of Immune Pharma. Dr. Teper, you've just announced preliminary data for your lead drug, Bertilimumab, in bullous pemphigoid. Tell us a little bit about that.
Sure, we are targeting a disease called bullous pemphigoid. Bullous pemphigoid is a rare disease. So yesterday, February 28th, was Rare Disease Day, and
Right.
President Trump, yesterday evening talked about rare disease, which is of increasing interest. There's been neglected diseases such as cystic fibrosis and many others, and bullous pemphigoid is one of those diseases. It's an autoimmune disease. It's a blistering disease. So patients, which for the most part are over 60 years old, are covered with dermatological symptoms, including many, blisters.
Must
And
be
there's the
painful.
it's very painful. It's itchy and painful, and there's limited treatment alternatives. And right now, many patients are treated with corticosteroids and often with oral prednisone at doses of up to 60 milligrams, chronically. Which
Terrible
is probably
side effects from that, of course.
terrible side effects, obviously, in older patients. I mean, actually, there's some reports that suggest that the mortality in patients that have that disease and are treated by corticosteroids, may be up to 2 times that of other people the same age, and that's because they get infections. Bone disease are worsening, cardiovascular conditions can worsen. So there's a very significant medical need for alternative treatments in bullous pemphigoid.
Obviously. So how many patients are afflicted with BP, as we'll call it here?
So there's an estimation of about 30,000 patients in the United States. That's actually similar to cystic fibrosis in number of patients. And on a worldwide basis, there's less data, but we assume there's 60 to 90,000 patients on a worldwide basis.
So that's a significant market, and especially given that the folks have such a deleterious effect. The work that
Yes.
you're doing on this is wonderful.
Yes, so obviously it's a significant investment to develop new drugs for bullous pemphigoid, but there are no alternative to corticosteroids. Our drug, Bertilimumab, is a biologic drug. It's potentially disease modifying, and we estimate that the worldwide market for biological drugs treating bullous pemphigoid may be as large as $500 to over $1 billion a year. So that's the significant
Of
opportunity.
course, that's significant. So from the study that's just been completed, what have you learned from that? And follow on to that, what are the next steps in completing your study?
So this is the first study with Bertilimumab in bullous pemphigoid. We also call it BP. It's probably also one of the very first study in that conditions, as we've learned from the key opinion leaders and from the patient organization. So we're very proud to be doing that study. It's a small study.
Right.
It's only 10 patients.
Right?
And the reason we came out with the preliminary results with only 3 patients, people always ask, why only 3 patients? First of all, in orphan disease, if you see a signal, you very often with 3 to 5 patients, reports, this clinical signal, and that's what we did. So what we've seen in the first 3 patients. We've seen a reduction in the disease index. It's called BPDI. It's a validated disease index of an average of 84%, which is pretty dramatic
That's
improvement
significant, right.
of the symptoms. We've also seen the ability to reduce the dose of corticosteroids to 10 milligrams or less, which is a much more tolerable dose, background dose of steroids. And lastly, but that's important, we haven't seen any severe adverse events that had to be reported. Now, in this study, we had very strict recruitment criteria. Patients had to be newly diagnosed and had limited exposure to corticosteroids for BP or for other conditions prior to entering the study. And we started with only 2 sites. So it took about 6 to 8 months to complete those first 2 patients, but on the basis of those initial results, we're now expanding the study to patients that are treated with corticosteroids, but you cannot taper down the dose of steroids, which is the majority of the patients. And that's on the request of the dermatologists that treat those patients. And we're also expanding the clinical study to 8 sites instead of 2 sites.
Right. So that's significant expansion?
The significant expansion that should allow us to complete the 10 patients in relatively short time frame and start planning for the next study, which most likely will be a placebo-controlled study, double-blind, and we'll look not only at the initial response in the first months of treatment, but also we'll look at the long-term response in using bertilimumab.
Well, that sounds significant. One last question, or one last subject for us to cover here. What other indications in dermatology do you see for bertilimumab?
So there's a very important indications that we're planning to initiate a clinical study in 2017. It's severe eczema, which is also called atopic dermatitis.
Okay.
People are familiar with psoriasis, which was treated by corticosteroids for many years, and other older treatments. And in the last few years, biologics have made a significant difference in the treatment. So the same phenomenon is happening with atopic dermatitis. And severe atopic dermatitis affects over 1 million adult patients in the United States. So you have a similar phenomenon. There's a drug called Bertilimumab from Regeneron and Sanofi that successfully completed clinical trials and shown a significant effect. So bertilimumab is a drug that would be an alternative biologic to Bertilimumab in atopic dermatitis. So that's a larger market.
Much larger, yeah, that expand your potential market.
That expands the potential market. So analysts are suggesting that this is potentially $3 to $5 billion, not necessarily for bertilimumab, but the size of the market in which we would be competing. And our objective is to be among the first biologic drug to treat that disease.
To move into that space. Well, it's a fascinating next step in the company's development. Thank you very much for joining us, Dr. Teper. We appreciate it. Thank you. For Corporate Connect, I'm Brian Crane. Thanks for joining us.